Our next speaker is María Luisa Martínez. She's a researcher at INECOL, which is the Institute for Ecology in Veracruz. And her research focuses on coastal systems, particularly restoration and ecosystem services. And within SEMIA, she's working on studying and mitigating the potential environmental impacts of ocean energy devices.
Thank you, Sharon, for presenting me. My camera should go on shortly, and I'll share my screen now. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I think it's very interesting, and like Edgar said, it's a good opportunity to share knowledge and to look for future cooperations in the Gulf of Mexico. So let me see if I can share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's just not on full presentation mode.
Yes. Okay, now it's okay. Yes. So as Sharon mentioned, my talk will deal with environmental impact and social perception of marine renewable energy. I work at the Institute of Ecology, and I'm part of the SEMIA Oceano project. So it's been interesting to work with so many people with different backgrounds, engineers, oceanographers, and anthropologists. It's been a very interesting work. So the outline of my talk is as follows. I will mention briefly how two United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are associated with marine renewable energy. Then I will talk about some studies we have performed on assessing the impact of MREs on the environment. Then a brief study on the social perception on marine renewable energy. And finally, I will present a case study for Mexico. So the United Nations, you know, that has set a set of sustainable development goals. And goals number 7 and 13 are directly related to energy. Goal number 7 mentions that it's important to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And goal number 13 mentions that it's urgent to take action to combat climate change and its impacts, which means reducing CO2 emissions. So both goals are directly related to marine renewable energy, because as technology develops, it can provide affordable energy, reduce CO2 emissions. It should be technically efficient as technology develops, but it should also be environmentally friendly and socially acceptable. So all these 5 elements are very important, but I will only focus on the last 2, environment and social. So last year, we published this paper on the environmental impacts of ocean energy production. We are a very large group. Actually, it's the group in the SEMIA Oceano project that works on the environment. And I will mention how we performed this study. The conceptual causal framework of this analysis used 4 elements when analyzing the environmental impact. First, we consider the stressor, which is the action or the device that modifies the natural dynamics of the ecosystems. Then it's the effects, which are the changes in the environment that are induced by the stressor. The receptors are the elements that respond to or are affected by the stressors and their effects. And finally, the responses are the changes in the receptors. We use this framework instead of the stressor receptor because it allows us to analyze with more detail the potential environmental impacts. So we performed a literature review because environmental studies in Mexico we're just beginning to perform them. And we looked for articles that had ocean energy or wave energy or tidal energy, but they also should consider the word environment in the title abstract keywords. So this is what we found. The column that says total number of references is the total number of articles that mentioned environment in these parts of the articles. But then the next column that says environmental impact studies are studies that actually performed an environmental impact assessment. So it's different to say that only mention the word environment or to perform an environmental impact assessment. So you can see that in all the types of energies, there's a greater number of studies than when you that mention only environment, that when they actually performed the assessment. And also there's a time lag between the first reference to environment to the actual study of the environment. And it's a very reduced percentage of the studies that actually perform an environmental study. So there are some countries that are more active in this sense than others, but slowly it's beginning to increase. So this is the Sankey diagram that we elaborated, in which we analyzed the stressors, the impacts, receptors, and the responses. So I will go briefly over each one of them. According to the literature, which was a little over 200 articles, most of the studies focus on the function and devices. A very few percentage focus on the presence of the device, and very few studies on the mooring action of the settlement of the devices. Then the impacts most frequently mentioned are noise, collision, habitat change, water quality, hydrosedimentary dynamics modification, and changes in, for instance, artificial reef regeneration, new habitats. The receptors most frequently mentioned in all these studies are marine fauna, mammals, fish, birds, turtles, all the vertebrates and invertebrates. And also humans can be affected because they do not accept these energies, benthic communities. And some studies even mention that the shoreline can be affected because of modification of the hydrosedimentary dynamics. And finally, the responses include the behavior of animals, injuries or death, by changes in biodiversity, changes in food web dynamics, and also changes in the distribution of species, and some changes in society as well. So it's a very complex set of variables that are considered in these studies on environmental impact of MREs. So, you know, the world has a lot of coasts and a lot of oceans, and many human settlements could benefit from ocean energy. Actually, according to this author, McGranaham et al., low elevation coastal zones, which are zones at less than 10 meters above sea level, concentrate only 2% of the land of all the continents, but 10% of the worldwide population. And here in this map, you can see all the cities located on the coast, and you can see that there's a high potential of having benefits of marine renewable energy in these urban locations. And actually, the need for electricity is very relevant, as the United Nations reported in 2017 that mentions that 789 million people still lack electricity. So the challenge is great. And I think it's greater because population is increasing. So these needs are increasing continuously. So if we want to implement new technologies, the perception of the society is very important, because you cannot just deploy the new devices and expect that inhabitants will be happy with these new changes in their environment. So this is another example I want to mention of another study that we performed in a Mexican biosphere reserve in Rio Lagartos, in which we assessed the potential of using marine renewable energy, and we assessed this potential according to a multidisciplinary approach, but I will only focus on the social study. So in the map, you will see the location of the Rio Lagartos Biosphere Reserve. It's in the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And on the graph on the right-hand side, I am showing you the knowledge of alternative renewable energies that people have belonging to different groups, which are men, women, and teenagers. So it's interesting that women, half of them, of the interviewees, did not know anything about renewable energies, and half did, whereas men and teenagers were better informed regarding renewable energies. In table 1 on the bottom left-hand side, you can see the key elements of the environment that women, men, and teenagers were most reluctant to see changed in their environment. So the most relevant element in this assessment was that they do not want to see any changes in the ocean or the beach. This is women, men, and teenagers. And then women were very emphatic in having the landscape changed. They did not want any changes in their landscapes, surrounding natural landscape. So this means that this location where we were exploring about the possibility of installing renewable energy devices, they would be very reluctant to having any changes in their environment. So it would be very difficult socially speaking. So finally, I want to show you this study, countrywide study, in which we performed an analysis of the socioeconomic needs, environmental restrictions, and opportunities for developing marine renewable energy. This is the map of Mexico, and the green areas show protected natural areas. So this is a good proxy to see the biodiversity hotspots that are relevant and that should be emphasized in being protected. Then you can see the blue dots along the coast of Mexico they show coastal settlements that lack electricity. So you can see that we have a big challenge on the coast of providing people with electricity. It looks like a lot of settlements, but the number of inhabitants is not that large, although this doesn't mean it's not relevant. It's nearly 40,000 people that live on the coast and that lack electricity. But still, they would be benefited by renewable energy from the ocean, and also the coastal cities would also could be benefited from marine renewable energy. Here in this set of 4 maps, we can see the assessment and the calculations made by the engineers of how marine renewable energy could be obtained from the waves, from wind offshore devices, ocean currents, and OTEC. So you can see that depending on the energy, and because the Mexican coast is very heterogeneous in its shape, geomorphology, and how the ocean and currents work, the energy available is also very different, depending on the type of energy. For instance, waves are more important on the Pacific, whereas ocean currents in the Quintana Roo area, and OTEC in the Southern Pacific. So when we combined the elements, we can see that it's a difficult task because we have different conditions. For instance, in the area that I numbered with number 1, oops, sorry. Oh, I lost my presentation.
We can see it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, but I can't. Okay, I found it. So in the area that it's number 1, we have relatively high socioeconomic need, but it's a high biodiversity hotspot. So even though we have a high energy potential, we have the challenge of a diversity hotspot. This similar trend can be observed in the Southern Pacific and in the Caribbean, in Yucatan, spots number 2 and 4. Whereas in number 3, we have a high socioeconomic need. We don't have high biodiversity hotspots, but the potential for energy from the ocean is reduced. So the decisions are not easy, but we should consider that they should be socioeconomically adequate, environmentally friendly, and technologically feasible. So in brief, the commitments to follow the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals mean that marine renewable energy is a good possibility to help fulfill these goals. It's an alternative that could work, especially for those coastal settlements that are located at less than 10 kilometers from the coast and less than 100 meters above sea level. They could improve human well-being, especially for extreme poverty and poorest conditions. And it's an opportunity to develop new technologies that are also together with environmental impact assessments and mitigation. So my last slide is a reflection on the complexity of assessing the environmental impact and combining it with the technology and with the social needs. So this is the parable of an Indian parable. It's the 6 blind men that they're supposed to analyze an elephant. And you can see that each one has a different interpretation of the elephant according to what they're touching. So if we put together all these interpretations, this would be the elephant, which is not actually the reality. So that's what we're faced with. You know, we have different elements of these decisions of marine renewable energy, but we are trying to be closer to reality, but it's just a difficult task because we perceive different aspects. So thank you very much. This was done with the collaboration of many people whose pictures are here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, María Luisa. That's fascinating and complex, as you said. Our next